Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts.
And welcome to Point of View on this Wednesday, October 11th, 2017 day. My name is Nick Pitts, and I'm co-hosting Point of View today. Kirby is out today. And this is the Millennial Roundtable. If it's Wednesday, it's the Millennial Roundtable. But unfortunately, I am the only millennial around this roundtable. I've got Generation X is trying to X me out of this. And so let me introduce you to some of the individuals that are around the roundtable today. We've got John Pendergrass is here today. John Pendergrass is the Director of Strategic Partnerships at Dallas Baptist University. Was originally at Initiative Network, which is a millennial empowerment organization here in the Dallas area that tries to empower millennials to be able to unite with churches, to be able to be common forces of good and local missionaries. John, great to have you today.
I'm glad to be here. Thanks, Nick, for inviting me in, and I look forward to the show today.
Yeah, very neat, very neat. And we also have the one, the only, Dr. Brent Taylor here today. Dr. Taylor is obviously a pastor of First Baptist Carrollton and Church of the Fields, I believe, now.
That's correct.
And so how are you today, Brent?
I'm well. How are you?
I can't complain. I can't complain. You know why I can't complain? It's the Millennial Roundtable on this Wednesday, October 11th day, which also happens to be National Bring Your Teddy Bear to Work Day. Yeah. And I do not see any teddy bears around the roundtable.
You know, I left mine in the car. I didn't realize that.
But he texted me and warned me that was going to happen, so I picked one up on the way over.
Okay, good deal, good deal. Well, nevertheless, we are so excited that you've decided to join us today, and please know that this is Point of View as well, and we would love to hear from you. So if you want to call in and add your point of view to the roster of conversation that we'll be having today, you can call in at 800-351-1212. 800-351-1212. And we've got quite a show for you today. We're going to be talking about everything from President Trump's recent tweet early this morning. We'll kind of kick off the show with that. But we'll also be talking about Roger Goodell and the letter that he sent to NFL owners yesterday, asking them to encourage their players to stand for the national anthem and potentially entertain the idea of bringing about a rule for the national anthem requiring standing from the players. We'll be talking about the tradition of naming a top student. The valedictorian at high schools is being dropped right now, and what are we to think about that? We'll be kind of walking through as well. The anti-Christian bias hasn't grown, according to recent research, and we'll be speaking about that and kind of elaborating upon that. And then, of course, it wouldn't be a Millennial Roundtable if we weren't talking about social media. Am I right, Brent?
Absolutely. We've got to talk about that.
Yeah, so the selfie-taking, Uber-riding millennial will be offering his comments as well, and we'll be looking forward to hearing from you all as well. But first off, we got to get started with what's happening over on the Twitter universe. And so President Trump has been making news this morning with a tweet that he sent out, and he kind of said, quote, on Twitter at 8:55 this morning, with all of the fake news coming out of NBC and the networks, at what point is it appropriate to challenge their license? Bad for the country. And so, as has often been speculated and been talked about, President Trump is utilizing once again one of his favorite mediums and communication mediums, that being Twitter, and doing so in a way that some are deeming as threatening to the press as well as to the First Amendment. But this isn't anything that would be out of the ordinary for this president. He has kind of had a hostile relationship, I guess would be the general tenor and general characteristic with the press. And so it was just very shocking to see. Now, I think there is to a certain degree, Brent, I guess you could say that has been kind of that tenuous relationship with the media and the president.
Well, it's interesting when you look back over history. There's always been an interesting relationship that the president has had with the media and how they have handled that. And obviously, years ago, there was a lot more trust in the government. There was a lot more trust in the media. And what we're seeing, certainly after Watergate, but in more recent years, is a breakdown on both sides. And so the general public is looking to the president, they're looking to the media, and they're questioning both. And at times, I think that the general public is watching almost like two sides are fighting, but they're choosing their battle depending on the day and choosing their side depending on the day. And that's a frightening proposition because I think part of what's made our country great is having both sides. I mean, you go back to John Adams, and if people spoke out against him through Alien and Sedition Acts, you have charges that could be made and people in the press to be put in prison, which obviously was a bad mark on his presidency when we look at the Sedition Acts. So you look at those experiences and you think about what's happening today, and you realize as a country we need a free press. And at the same time, we know that we elect leaders to lead and to speak out. And it's an interesting time right now. I think that most people are trying to figure out where they land, and the problem is that can change on a daily basis, which is frustrating.
Yeah, so Brent has a great book, Founding Leadership, that really does explore kind of some leadership lessons from some of the founding fathers. And it's really just interesting when you look back and you think about what Mark Twain said, that history doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme. And as we look back through history, what we're going to continue to see is there's always been this hostile relationship between the press as well as the president. That was one of the beauties of what one of the founders would say, specifically James Madison in the Federalist Papers. He would kind of liken it to the Greek epic Argus, who is this 100-eyed animal. And he believed it to be true that light is the greatest disinfectant. And so what we want is we want an informed populace through the media, as well as just the populace just kind of ascertaining their own and finding out their own information in order to hold their leaders accountable. Because even back then, it's pretty hard to imagine. It was even worse back then. Let's look back, and we can think back to Alexander Hamilton. Alexander Hamilton was the first Treasury Secretary, was very much a close advocate and a close aide of General Washington, who became the first president, obviously, of the U.S. And so Hamilton was the kind of the founder, or I guess you could say a very instrumental figure in the Gazette of the United States, which would have been kind of the Federalist Party paper. And what he did is he made sure, and he hired individuals to be able to speak ill will against the rival faction, which was that of Madison as well as Jefferson. But then on the flip side, you had Jefferson, who was Secretary of State back then, who hired an individual with Secretary of State dollars to function as a translator, but also to function as the editor of the rival paper, which was National Gazette. So we see these two media factions rivaling against one another, speaking ill will, spreading misinformation. And when you're spreading that type of misinformation, John, it does kind of eradicate trust in the public, doesn't it?
Yeah, I would say that the lack of trust that you're talking about, I think that the base that he's appealing to, his base, Trump's base, I don't think they're surprised. I think this is something they actually expected from Donald Trump. And the base looking towards the media, they consider them part of the establishment. And I think when he uses inflammatory terms such as fake news, and even you just mentioned that this is nothing new, this has been around forever, I think the base is behind him on this. His base specifically is behind him on this.
Yeah, and we would love to hear what your opinion is relative to Donald Trump's tweet, as well as particularly your vantage point maybe of the media. Do you trust the media? Do you distrust the media? What are the sources that you're getting your information from? We would love to hear from you. And so you can call in at 800-351-1212, 800-351-1212. And when we get back, we're going to discuss some of the implications of just kind of that brooding distrust that's happening within some of our intermediate institutions. And we'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Last month, Nicholas Kristof stirred the political waters when he wrote an op-ed with the title A Confession of Liberal Intolerance. The response to his piece led to a second one with the title The Liberal Blind Spot. He began his first piece by acknowledging that we progressives believe in diversity and want women, blacks, Latinos, gays, and Muslims at the table so as long as they aren't conservatives. He concludes the liberals are fine with people who don't look like them as long as they think like them. He quotes from Professor George Yancey, who is a sociologist who is also a black evangelical. Yancey, who's been on my radio program, says that he's faced some problems as a black outside of academia, but faced many more problems inside academia because he was a Christian. Nicholas Kristof seemed appalled at the response to his first op-ed, hence the reason for his second commentary. Liberals have written that much of the conservative worldview consists of ideas that are known to be empirically to be false. Another asked facetiously, how about we make faculties more diverse by hiring idiots? Although he gives good examples of outstanding people in various fields that are evangelicals, his liberal friends will have none of it. That is why he is calling on his readers to begin to tackle their liberal blind spot. He cites a survey that shows that a majority of academics in some fields would discriminate against a job seeker that was an evangelical. He says that feels like bigotry. Part of the problem may be that liberals are isolated and don't know any evangelicals. He reminds us of surveys that show Americans have negative views of Muslims when they don't know any. He says that he suspects that many liberals disdain evangelicals in part because they don't have any evangelical friends. I applaud Nicholas Kristof for his observations. Sadly, I doubt that it will have much of an impact on the millions of closed-minded liberals. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Based on the incredible true story and best-selling book from Paramount Pictures and PureFlix comes Same Kind of Different as Me, rated PG-13, in theaters October 20th.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And we are back on Point of View, and I am Nick Pitts, and I'm joined today at the Millennial Roundtable by a couple of Gen Xers. We've got Dr. Brent Taylor of First Baptist Carrollton, Church at the Fields, as well as John Pendergrass, formerly of Initiative, but now at Dallas Baptist University, the Director of Strategic Partnerships. And during the break, we were kind of continuing the conversation relative to Donald Trump and just the almost like the indirect threat towards the First Amendment, really just pointing to the fact that there's just this increasing distrust that individuals have towards the media as well as towards the president. There was a fascinating study that was put out, I believe it was by Barna Group, that indicated among Republicans, 90% of Republicans trusted the president, but only 10% trusted CNN. Whereas among Democrats, 89% trusted CNN and 11% trusted the president. And so we've just got this increasing distrust that's kind of pervading the American landscape. And it's very difficult, especially when it comes to the media, because we know that our founders believed it to be true that an educated populace was going to be necessary for us in order to be able to move forward. And Brent, from your perspective, when you hear about hashtag fake news, when you hear about just this increasing distrust and cynicism, help me to be able to explain, as an individual that is preaching the good news of Jesus, what are some of the steps that you're taking? Help me to better understand, how do you preach the good news in fake news era?
Well, it's interesting because I think a lot of people today almost view what's happening in the media, fake news, these types of things, in some extent like it's a sport that they watch. It's something that's on the outside, but in their own life, they're looking for authenticity. They're looking for something real, and I think it's so important for the church today to be connecting with people in an interpersonal kind of way to show authenticity in their life. They're a real person. You can access me. You can talk to me. And I think that authenticity is what helps to build the confidence that people have. But I think Christians also have to be willing to engage the culture and to talk about things that are sometimes uncomfortable, because Christians are really good. We really like tying everything up with a bow at the end. And we want all of our Christian movies and all of our Christian books to all end with a happy ending and all tie up real nice. But the fact is, life doesn't always do that. And so I think we have to be willing to be authentic, to say, hey, I don't know, I don't understand, but let's explore this together. I think people are on a journey. When you look at what's happening in the media, fake news, people choose sides. They take, they believe who they want to believe. But I think in their day in, day out life, they're looking for somebody who is real. I think that's the best opportunity the church has to present the gospel, is to be the gospel and to be Jesus to people in a world that is very skeptical and trying to figure out, are you authentic? Are you the real deal?
Yeah, it reminds me of a study, John, that was published at a Time magazine. And what they did is they had two individuals. They had one product, and that one product they were advertising through two different mediums. One was kind of the traditional advertisement that you would see on the side of Facebook, because they were specifically targeting Facebook. Did the individual have more of a propensity to click it if it was a regular advertisement on the side, or if an individual that they knew that was in their friends list was advocating for it? And by and large, the vast majority of individuals were more likely to click on the advertisement if it was put forward through a friend of theirs rather than on the side through some advertisement through corporations. And it kind of points to that authenticity. We want individuals that are advocating for particular products. We trust individuals, but we might not necessarily trust institutions. Does that line up with kind of some of your experience that you've had with millennials?
Yeah, and what I was going to say is Brent, thank you for bringing up the authenticity thing, because that speaks to the heart of what millennials desire. They are hungry and starving, and you as a pastor know this better than anyone, are starving for that authenticity. And you mentioned that they would trust a friend. And this is where there's a real opportunity for the church, because, and you kind of set me up there, is that if we are out engaging culture, if we actually get outside the walls of the church and live the life that Christ has called us to live, people see that as being authentic. Whether they may not believe us at first, or they definitely are interested and intrigued. I think the Lord is setting this up as an opportunity for the church.
I think what you're saying, John, is exactly right. And I think a very practical way of looking at it is the movies. Okay, so I'm the oldest of the three of us, which I'm not so proud to say. But when I was growing up, we watched to see what the movie reviewers had to say about an upcoming movie. And there were people that were on local news that you watched, or there were national reviewers on Good Morning America or whatever the show was, to talk about how good this movie was going to be. I can't really name any of those people anymore because I don't pay any attention to that. People today look at social media. They talk to people. Did you see this movie? How was it? It was great. You got to go see this movie. Well, I think that's in microcosm really the opportunity we have for the gospel. It's not just the experts at church, but if believers would seek authenticity in their own lives and in their relationships, I think that's where people begin to get attracted. There's something different about that person, which is not revolutionary at all. It goes back all the way back 2,000 years to the way that the disciples did it. And so in a world where everything is about fake news, fake, phony, and artificial, we have an incredible opportunity, I think, to stand out. And that's by being real, by being authentic, by building relationships with people that are real relationships. That is a revolutionary concept in a world of fake news.
Yeah, I'm always, John, I'm very much always like encouraged and just kind of put in awe whenever I remember what the kind of the story from Acts, where they realized that these were uneducated men, but they had been with Jesus. These two significant contrasts: individuals that were not learned individuals that would be seen as less than in society, but there was some glorious glimmer to them that had caused individuals to be able to see that they had been with Jesus. And what not a great opportunity for us just to have an opportunity to be able to be a witness, not necessarily to be a professional apologist or kind of a expert theologian, leading theologian relative to New Testament studies, Old Testament, et cetera, but just a witness to what God has done. I once was blind, but now I see.
Amen. Well, I will tell you that just some of my past experience and job experience, leading a local missions organization and doing a lot of work within the communities, it's really simple. You would not believe what this authenticity, this authentic love that we show to our neighbors. Think about what Christ said, love your neighbor as you love, love your neighbor as you love yourself.
Yeah.
And I think that if we actually do what we're sitting here talking about and the opportunity that we have and working in the community like I had is just walking next door and knocking on your neighbor's door. I know that seems so simple, but a lot of us aren't doing it. And I read a book called The Art of Neighboring, where they took a group of pastors and brought them into a room and sat them down. And I'm trying not to digress too much, but the city mayor walked in and just basically asked them a question. When's the last time you guys have just engaged this community and walked next door and talked to your own neighbor? And not one of them could say we had. So that really prompted something within me, and I tried it and just began walking next door and talking to my neighbors. And that simple act of love went so far. I mean, people are hungry for it, and that's my point. People are starving for just this thing that we call authentic love. Yeah. And that's what Christ called us to do.
And perhaps that's the appeal, not necessarily the authentic love part, but very much the authenticity relative to Trump is there's this sense that he is speaking a non-PC language. He's, quote unquote, shooting it straight. He's an individual that's just kind of saying whatever is on his mind or tweeting whatever is on his mind. And there really is that authenticity that's getting past some of the talking points, that's getting past some of the, I guess you would say, the focus group tested lines that are really appealing to the kind of the common populace right now. But I think it's important for us as individuals that are Christians in nature, right, Brent, that we are seeking after wisdom, that we're individuals that are seeking to redeem our minds and ascertaining truth wherever we might find it. And so not just necessarily wholeheartedly trusting one individual, but really trying to diverge a variety of different sources in order that we might come to the truth, because we recognize the truth sets us free, right?
Well, absolutely. And I think what you talked about with Trump is unique to his presidency. Mm-hmm. We've not seen this before, and it is causing a tremendous amount of joy for some people and a tremendous amount of angst for others, because he is able to jump past the mainstream media and go directly to where people are. Now, there's a lot of heartache that's in that as well, for not only people who are fans or those who are foes of the president, but also people within his own leadership circle that are having to try to navigate these things. But as believers, we have the opportunity to learn and seek to reach out to people in a way that says, hey, you see this happening in the world around you. It is a problem. But for us, we see it as an opportunity to connect with people and to share the gospel with folks.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we can see as success is that President Trump has been able to connect with people very quickly. And what a great opportunity through being authentic, through showing our scars, and through just bearing witness to what Christ has done in us, that we have an opportunity to share Christ with others. And so we'd love to hear from you. You can be sure to call in at 800-351-1212, and we'll be back right after this.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of view can be a key part of a successful mission. I believe in America. I believe God wants His best for us. We can face whatever the world throws at us as long as we stand together. If you have not signed on, please do it now. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Or call us 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is
Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View on this Wednesday, October 11th, 2017 day. This is the Millennial Roundtable Point of View. Kirby is out today, but we are joined by two stellar co-hosts. When we've got Dr. Brent Taylor of First Baptist Carrollton here in studio, has a great book out called Founding Leadership, and also has another book that's pending that is about to be out as well that we'll talk about a little later on in the show. And then we've also joined by the Director of Strategic Partnerships at Dallas Baptist University, Mr. John Pendergrass. And we have been talking for the first half hour about President Trump and his tweet that he sent out earlier this morning. He was questioning the licensing and threatening the licensing of NBC and other purveyors of news that might try to be antagonistic towards the president, or they would argue truthful towards the president. And we've been talking everything about kind of the distrust that's simmering underneath the underbelly of the U.S., this sense that we really can't trust one another, we can't trust institutions, and what are some of the implications for that from a spiritual perspective as well as from a policy perspective as well. But one of the interesting things that we kind of highlighted that I think is really important to understand is this idea that authenticity has great currency in our society today. Individuals that can be authentic with one another, it tends to fall on good soil. And so indirectly, we could point back to the idea that in a sense, Donald Trump, or President Trump rather, is being very authentic. It appears as though through his tweets by kind of being very direct. And that could be the reason why it's being picked up so quickly. And so we've also opened the phone lines to you all. You can call in and add your point of view at 800-351-1212. We're willing to take your calls today, and we're going to take one of those right now. We've got Ken from Alabama. Ken, are you there?
Hello. Good afternoon, sir.
Hey, Ken. Whereabouts in Alabama are you?
Birmingham.
Oh, Birmingham. I ran the Mercedes Marathon there a few years back.
Oh, really? How about
I have the icicles on the back of my head to prove it because it was in the middle of February.
Okay. I was just wondering if any of you are familiar with a thing called the Smith-Munt. I think it's spelled M-U-N-D. The Smith-Munt Act.
I know a little bit about it, but you want to help our listeners understand?
Well, what very little I know about it is that it was probably repealed rather secretly in one of these probably Christmas tree bills, as they call it, that Congress passed. More than likely, probably the National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA, where they like to hang a lot of stuff that they want to secretly get through Congress. But it's my understanding that since the Smith-Munt Act has been repealed, it is now technically legal for our intelligence organizations, such as the CIA and others, to publish and put out, quote, propaganda, unquote, for public consumption to try to sway public opinion.
Yeah, so the original intent of the legislation authorized the U.S. State Department to communicate with audiences outside the borders through broadcasting.
Outside, right.
Yeah, outside the borders. And so it's through broadcasting, face-to-face contacts and exchanges and online activities, publishing of books, magazines, and other media engagement, is from what I understand.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So it's my understanding, if you'll check into that, I think it has now been repealed. So you need to do some investigative work on that. Maybe you can get back to us and report on that. There's many things out there, of course. One thing, just for instance, I'll just pass this along. As they say, we report, you decide. Right now, at the front page of naturalnews.com is the story. It says, exclusive, forensic acoustic analysis confirms the existence and range of a second Las Vegas shooter. I've heard some of the cell phone video, and people were saying, boy, it sure does sound like there was more than one shooter. Well, people are now trying to do some scientific investigation into it, and it does appear to be so, rather than the narrative that there was only one.
Wow, that is interesting, Kim. We're going to definitely have to check that out, and I'll get back to you on that. But, yeah, relative to the Smith-Munt Act, it was originally passed in 1948, and then the modernization of it came about in 2012 and then took place into fiscal year 2013. And what it's talking about is the U.S. being able to kind of go out and to be able to kind of communicate its message, be able to spread particular messages relative to the U.S. Outside the borders. But again, it points back to this idea of the communication and the mistrust that continues to be perpetuated. I mean, even we just continue to see this just moving along to where we just don't trust institutions anymore, as well as we don't trust individuals anymore. I was really interested. There was a study that was put up by Gallup that kind of pointed to this institutional distrust, that we are at historic lows relative to that. Favorability of Nickelback is at 37%, of Jar Jar Binks is at 29%, but Congress is at 9% right now.
Wow.
And so, but then relative to distrust of institutions, what we have going on right now is that individuals just increasingly don't trust the media. But what's fascinating for me is the individual distrust that 50 years ago, that 50% of Americans could trust their neighbor. That number now is at 32%. Among millennials, it's at 19%. Brent, do you have a theory as to why we might have this distrust that's just a part of us now? Is there something that we might point to that has caused this?
Well, first of all, I'm blown away by your Jar Jar Binks statistics. That's one of the finest stats I've ever heard on him. Which tells me also there's really something wrong with you, I think, Nick. But I think that when you look back historically, I think there has been a general feeling that the people out there are trying to do what's right. They're trying to do good. People who in government are trying to do what's best for the country. Obviously, I think Watergate, Vietnam, those things really began to redefine where we were as a culture and what happened in the Nixon administration. I'm going to actually be out at the Nixon Library this weekend. But what happened in the Nixon administration with Vietnam and the Watergate break-in, obviously the cover-up afterwards, obviously that leads to his resignation. It leads to Gerald Ford coming in, which leads to Carter, who kind of presents himself as, hey, I'm not one of those. And you can trace that line all the way down, even how one person affected the next. Reagan being put in position brings about the Bushes, and so you have these dynamics that have happened historically in our culture. And I think all through that time, people have begun less and less to believe their leadership. And I think part of that is because so much on the internet is completely made up. It's completely false, yet people believe it. And I really think Christians have to be careful, because some of the time as believers, we can want so badly for something to be true that we will almost, maybe unwittingly, engage in intellectual dishonesty in order to make something true in our minds.
Yeah.
So they'll put out on social media, they'll promote an idea or a topic that is just, there's just no fact.
It's like the idea of that barbecue is beef instead of pork, right? It's that idea that really barbecue is pork. Am I correct?
Okay, so for our listeners, this goes back to a previous conversation we had.
Fill us in.
When Nick was advocating for pork barbecue, but again, he cites Jar Jar Binks as a statistical reference, so that's all that needs to be said about barbecue.
Yeah, so Brent brings up a great point, John, and John, I'd love to hear it. It talks about the kind of the sociological construct is known as confirmation bias, that we have a certain preconceived notion, and then whenever we hear contrary evidence, we either rationalize it away or we try to build it into our particular theory. So, for example, I think my mother is the best, and so any evidence that would be contrary to that, I very quickly will rationalize it away. Whereas any evidence that I find that supports that, it only strengthens my confirmation bias. For Christians, there's a strong, he was speaking to a strong confirmational bias, but it's almost to the extent, John, there's such a great distrust that we're walking into these circles and spheres, or even on social media, and we already think we know everything, so we're not as open. And that can be very detrimental, right, if we're not willing to be learnable. TJ?
Yeah, I agree with that wholeheartedly. I would like to add something to what he said is everybody I'm talking to that goes along with what you're talking about, everyone I'm talking to about our distrust in Congress, because that's where we started, is I'm finding that it really has to do with the inability to compromise. And I just wanted to throw that out there. I think that Chris Christie once said that compromise isn't capitulation. And when you talk to young people, we don't get a choice when Congress hands something down. Once they hand something down, we have to compromise. But I think this distrust is we look back towards Congress, and Congress isn't a party that tends to walk out and compromise at all. So that's very frustrating. But we have to protect ourselves as believers. Is your second point there is as believers, we do tend to walk in these. We're not willing to compromise. We have our set of beliefs and we stick to them. And a lot of those beliefs you just mentioned come from social media. We form our biases and opinions. And I think that is a dangerous place for us as believers walk out from that perspective.
Yeah, that'd be really interesting. And we'd love to hear your comments on that, kind of the idea of being teachable. You can call in at 800-351-1212, 800-351-1212. And when we come back after the break, we're going to speak more to this idea of being teachable, especially in this fake news era. Right back.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Maria Nolan and St. Anne Catholic School had a falling out. Nolan thinks her religious employer fired her from her job as principal of the school for speaking out against what she viewed as racial discrimination. The Diocese of Birmingham, Alabama, that operates St. Anne's, said that Nolan simply wasn't the right person to advance their religious mission. Nolan's responsibilities were pretty clear. As principal, she was responsible for implementing an educational atmosphere charged with the Catholic beliefs of her employer. That included monitoring lesson plans to make sure the teaching of the church was reflected in the lessons of the classroom, leading school prayers, and organizing religious activities for the students and the faculty. The court quickly determined that there was little doubt that Nolan's role as principal falls within the general ambit of the ministerial exception. Although she lacked the formal title of minister, her role clearly conveyed the church's message and carried out its mission. Therefore, the court could not interfere with what amounts to a decision by a religious body as to who best perpetuates its religious message and mission. The ministerial exception is an important doctrine that protects the unique aspects of a religious employer, giving relief to religious organizations from the rigors of employment law that may hamper their unique religious mission. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And we are back on Point of View on this Wednesday, October 11th, 2017 day. We'll be joined at the Millennial Roundtable by a couple of Gen Xers that are intimately acquainted with millennials. And we've got Dr. Brent Taylor that's here, and pastor of First Baptist Carrollton, Church of the Fields, as well as John Pendergrass, who is at DBU, Dallas Baptist University. He's the Director of Strategic Partnerships over there. And we're going to continue to jump on some of these phone calls. And we've got Terry from Georgia right now. Terry, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Hey, Terry, whereabouts in Georgia are you?
Warner Robins, right below Macon, the big city.
Oh, yes, sir.
Macon.
Yes, sir. I'm originally from Tennessee, so I jumped out of a perfectly good airplane right above Dalton, Georgia. So, but nevertheless, what is your point of view, Terry?
Well, we're talking about distrust as a whole. I think I'm not a big fan of the term fake news, but I will say that we have been told certain things and certain elections are going on by the media, and as things keep getting pumped at us, and then the election turns upside down like it did in this last presidential election. So I think that causes us not to trust the media. I don't like the term fake news. I don't like the fact that I'm glad we got Donald Trump in office, but I don't like the fact that he can sit there and speak to each news station, say, you can't say anything, you can't say anything. I'm going to rule against you. If that be the case, then he'll be a dictator and we'll all be in a pickle. That's what it appears to me.
Terry, you bring up a really great point, and I'd love to be able to spell this out a little bit, because I think there's a delineation. We have to make a difference between the idea of fake news and biased news. I think all fake news typically tends to be biased news, but not all biased news is fake news. If you're following, it's this idea that we've always known there's to be fair and or rather to be objective is very hard in our world today. That, as we pointed out, especially dating back all the way to the beginnings of the American experiment, that we've always had bias in news, but there used to be a common ideal towards being fair in the news, and that doesn't always play out in our traditional media landscape today, and there's a sense of biasness. But like Terry was mentioning, there is a difference, though, between fake news and biased news, and it's important for us not to call everything fake news when it's really just biased news, right?
Well, think about in the scriptures. Did God say? That was the serpent talking to Eve.
Yeah.
And that's the origin of fake news, because what fake news is, in essence, is a lie. And anytime somebody is lying, you're advocating fake news, whether you're in social media or you're sitting across the table from someone. So, but we all have biases. We all have a point of view, just like we're talking about today. And so that is a reality. I think that Christians should always be standing for truth. And truth, sometimes there are people that have certain biases about what they believe to be true, and they interpret something a certain way. But I think that Christians have to recognize bias as a reality. Those things happen. But if someone is lying, that's a problem, and we should be willing to speak out. And I think the problem that we've seen in our culture today is that it's not just one side or the other. There are lies all over the place, and that's where we have to represent the truth in the midst of that.
Yeah, John, I can't help but think about just the contrast in Scripture between what you see as in John 8:44 is the idea that the father of all lies is the enemy, right? But then also on the other side, you see in John 16:4, rather, that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. Or from what you see in 1 Corinthians 1:30, it's this understanding that that I being Jesus and wisdom. And there's this compare and contrast where it's a very clear dichotomy between our Father in heaven, who is the truth, who is wisdom, and calls us to seek after wisdom like it's that of gold in Proverbs 2:4. And then there's the lies from the enemy that tries to seek, kill, and destroy. And it really is, it causes us to want to be individuals that stand for truth wherever we might find it, whether it's in the scriptures or whether it's in the newspapers, right?
Right. And I think the biggest one is Satan saying, I came to steal, kill, and destroy. But Jesus said, I came to give life and give it abundantly. And that is a huge contrast, and one that we all stand on and say, yeah, that's a big difference. But I think that where we're heading with all of this ultimately is that people are going to draw a line in the sand and say, I'm either going to stand for this, meaning I need the media to be truthful, or we're not going to support them anymore, or they're going to continue just to listen to what they're being fed and not seek out the truth, if we're taking it back to a secular perspective.
Well, and I also think, too, that in the way that we engage the culture as believers, our tendency, going back to that bias, we have a tendency to watch the news that we approve of, and so we want to watch the channel that is most consistent, that will affirm what we think and what we believe. I think what leaders do is leaders listen to all sides, and then we have the Spirit of God that gives us discernment, and so we need to exercise discernment. We need to look and see what this side is saying, what that side is saying, because I think sometimes we put our confidence, our belief, and our faith too much in systems that we have as opposed to putting our faith in the Lord. And the fact is, there are people on both sides of many of the political divides we have in our country that are good and godly people, and there are arguments on both sides that need to be listened to and understood so that we can process and find what is best. If we allow bias to dominate our perspective and our point of view, then we close our ears off to things that maybe we don't want to hear. And while it's easy in the church to condemn people who only want to listen to a message that their itching ears want to hear, we can have itching ears when it comes to politics, when it comes to policy, and when it comes to ideas that we would deem to be fake news today.
Yeah, I'm always reminded, if you go back into the Old Testament, when you see Jacob wrestling at the well in the middle of the night, it's this idea that Jacob is wrestling with God, and he's not going to let go until God blesses him. And in turn, God not only blesses him, but he changes his name and he walks away with a limp. It's this understanding that we're all called to a certain degree to wrestle with the truth, right? That we're wanting to be good researchers that are spurred on by our curiosity. And when we're entertaining these variety of sources because we believe it to be true, what John Milton said, let her and falsehood, her being truth, let her and falsehood wrestle in a field, for I've never known truth to be put asunder. We can take heart and confidence in the fact that truth always wins out, but and it only strengthens us when we do this wrestling process. Right, John, I can't help but think, I'm sure that you've had an opportunity to be able to wrestle in the scriptures, and as you're trying to figure out the truth and the implications for that truth in your life, and you've probably walked away better from it, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm constantly growing. I'm constantly wrestling, and I think that all the believers out there listening right now could attest to that same truth. And I think that there are truths that are in Scripture that I'm just now almost being enlightened with in my own life and own walk, where I didn't necessarily see something at first, and now I'm like, well, that's been the truth. It's been there the whole time, but I had my own biases that has either been taught to me or just my own personal experiences that when I look back at truth, I'm like, no, that's Scripture says this. I need to really dig in and understand that more. So you're absolutely right.
Yeah, so I'm looking at this sheet of paper right now that's our rundown, and I'm always very cautious because I know that this piece of paper has the ability to cut me. And it's shocking how much a little piece of paper can cause such great pain.
A lot of pain.
Cut. Yeah, and just I'm reminded that the Scriptures are ultimately what's the illustrative example is that they're a sword. And swords were never, but you can play with a sword, but inevitably a sword's going to cut you. And the cut is always that of a physician. The physician is going to cut you in order to bring healing and hope and bring you back to a fuller restoration of the life and a life to the fullest. And we always want to be wrestling with the truth, whether we find it in the Scriptures or in the world, in order that we might be better for it. And we'll be back right after this.
At dinner recently, I was struck by the couple in front of me. They were allegedly spending a night out together, but the only time they communicated in a half hour was one time when the man showed what was on his phone to the woman, and then back to their own screens. We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You'll find us online with your phone, your tablet, your laptop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues. You can also follow our new YouTube video series, Uncensored. Stay informed. Follow us on Twitter at Point of View RTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Again, at Point of View RTS. We'd love you to retweet us, to share our Facebook posts, but please don't do it when you're out with your family or someone you love. We can wait. We're online 24 hours a day. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts. And welcome back to Point of View on this Wednesday, October 11th, 2017 day. My name is Nick Pitts, and I am hosting Point of View today in place of Kirby Anderson, who is out of town today, and I am joined at the Millennial Roundtable by a couple of Gen Xers. And so we've got Dr. Brent Taylor from First Baptist Carrollton, Texas, and also Church at the Fields. Brent, how are you today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I can't complain, except the fact that we don't always agree on barbecue preferences. But I think some of our callers might disagree with you as well on barbecue. But nevertheless,
praying for all of you.
Yeah, yeah, okay. And then we also joined at the roundtable by John Pendergrass. John represents Dallas Baptist University. He's the director of strategic partnerships, but also did a great amount of work with an initiative network. So our callers and listeners are very familiar with Initiative and the great work that they're doing, not only based here in Dallas, but just really around the country and then around the world, of trying to mobilize millennials to be partnered up with churches in the area. John, great to be with you.
Excited to be here, Nick.
Ah, so great, so great. And so during the first hour, we kind of gave attention to President Trump and his tweet that was expressing his displeasure relative to the media, but also his threats to try to take away some of the license. But also, we're going to transition now, because there's been this kind of continual conflict and kind of continual controversy surrounding the NFL. The NFL kind of entered into this confluence of just bad factors that really caused viewership to take a tumble. There was even a recent poll put out by Pew that showed the NBA has exceeded popularity of NFL within this past month as compared to last year. And a large part of that stems from kind of the politicalization of the NFL, specifically of individuals that are kneeling during the national anthem. And Roger Goodell sought to kind of address that issue yesterday when he put out a memo that was sent out among the owners, and he said, quote, "Everyone should stand during the national anthem." He wrote in a memo to all 32 teams, adding that the NFL will be present and will present a plan next week to help move past this controversy. He did go on to say that he's very proud of players, quote, and owners who have done the hard work over the years to listen, understand, and attempt to address the underlying issues within their communities, and express respect for players' opinions and their concerns about critical social issues. And so this is the first time that Roger Goodell has kind of stepped into this, but really this has been going on for a couple of years now, really started by Colin Kaepernick, right, Brent?
That's right. Colin Kaepernick was the one that brought it to the forefront, kneeling during the national anthem. And I think that what's interesting about it is how this argument or how this discussion has evolved over time, because it was originally Kaepernick that was taking this stand to protest police brutality across the country. And that issue is not really even discussed as much anymore, because it's really now become an issue of patriotism, whether or not you support the troops, whether or not you support the country. And it's interesting just how in our culture today, one issue can explode and become multiple issues, and that's where we sit right now.
Yeah, John, we were talking about that during the break, right? That it's just been such a great shift that's been happening right now in the NFL. And what started off as a kneeling, like what Brent said, to bring about, to highlight the kind of the police brutality, racial injustice in the system, now has turned into something radically different, to where now we're just trying to figure out, what are individuals kneeling for? Do they not respect our country? What have you?
Yeah, and I was actually not feeling well yesterday, and I was at home, and I never watched The View, but I flipped it over and caught The View, and just caught Whoopi interviewing Eric Reed, who plays for the 49ers, and talking about the two stark opinions and views. Eric Reed said, this is totally being lost. The narrative is changing. We knelt because we wanted there to be a focus on police brutality and obviously, as you just mentioned, Brent, social injustice or injustice, specifically to African Americans. And so when you hear the two sides, they don't even sound the same. They are, both. Something's getting lost in translation.
Yeah, it's just really interesting because there's this sense. Brent, help me enter into this conflict for a second. There's a sense that almost a biblical justification can be made for both sides, as I've been thinking about it. On the one side, you can see that the individuals that are kneeling, it doesn't appear as though they're obeying kind of a Romans 13, give honor where honor is due, give respect where respect is due. That this is breaking literally the U.S. code relative to respect to the flag and to the anthem. So there's a sense from a biblical understanding that they should probably give respect to where respect is due. But then there's also the other side of the coin, right, where this civil disobedience that we continue to hear about in the biblical narrative, everywhere from Daniel not refusing to bow down to the Hebrew midwives refusing to kind of obey Pharaoh's orders to kill the firstborn child. And then really just seeing this really epitomized in Jesus' narrative in Luke 10 of the persistent widow, appealing for the justice and being persistent in that. And so there's really this mixed handbag of Christian opinions right now that really does, yes, there's a want for justice, but also there's a desire for respect to be given.
Well, I think that we're missing the point completely, just to be honest with you, because I think that while we talk about the issue of injustice that's happening in our country, and we talk about the issue of respecting the flag, all of these issues are very important. Our nation was birthed in this idea of protest. I mean, the United States was founded out of protest. The Declaration of Independence is a protest letter. And that wasn't the first letter that had gone to the king in the process. The Boston Tea Party was protest. The March on Washington with Dr. Martin Luther King was protest. Rosa Parks, protest. We see over and over again in our nation this rich history, and these protests so often go to what people hold dear in order to capture attention. And that's what happened with kneeling during the flag, was trying to capture people's attention in a way that would stir up a controversy, would bring attention, would cause a problem. From a scriptural side of things, we really wrestle with that because we see there are acts of protest that happen in Scripture at times, and then there are also times where, like you talked about, where the Bible talks to us to give honor where honor is due, and to respect those in government and in authority, and that scriptural mandate, along with the biblical, with the where we are in the country today. Those two things oftentimes are colliding, and we have a culture that today is seeking to try to define ourselves, to try to figure out who we are, because we want to respect the flag, we want to respect the country as we should. I think I'm one who stands for the flag. I teach my children to stand and to sing the national anthem. But I also understand we come out of a country that is born out of protest, and so these issues become hot issues in our culture. And yet I'm not sure that the original reason why the protest was started is still in the middle of the screen.
Yeah, is the medium the message is really the kind of the key now. Or what are we really protesting, or what's being protested, rather, I should say. And so we'll continue to talk about this, and we'd love to hear your point of view as well. What do you think of what's happening, of Roger Goodell's letter, of Commissioner Goodell stepping into this? What is your point of view? And you can call in and tell us at 800-351-1212. 800-351-1212, and we'll pick up with this conversation when we get back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Last month, Nicholas Kristof stirred the political waters when he wrote an op-ed with the title A Confession of Liberal Intolerance. The response to his piece led to a second one with the title The Liberal Blind Spot. He began his first piece by acknowledging that we progressives believe in diversity and want women, blacks, Latinos, gays, and Muslims at the table so as long as they aren't conservatives. He concludes the liberals are fine with people who don't look like them as long as they think like them. He quotes from Professor George Yancey, who is a sociologist who is also a black evangelical. Yancey, who's been on my radio program, says that he's faced some problems as a black outside of academia, but faced many more problems inside academia because he was a Christian. Nicholas Kristof seemed appalled at the response to his first op-ed, hence the reason for his second commentary. Liberals have written that much of the conservative worldview consists of ideas that are known to be empirically to be false. Another asked facetiously, how about we make faculties more diverse by hiring idiots? Although he gives good examples of outstanding people in various fields that are evangelicals, his liberal friends will have none of it. That is why he is calling on his readers to begin to tackle their liberal blind spot. He cites a survey that shows that a majority of academics in some fields would discriminate against a job seeker that was an evangelical. He says that feels like bigotry. Part of the problem may be that liberals are isolated and don't know any evangelicals. He reminds us of surveys that show Americans have negative views of Muslims when they don't know any. He says that he suspects that many liberals disdain evangelicals in part because they don't have any evangelical friends. I applaud Nicholas Kristof for his observations. Sadly, I doubt that it will have much of an impact on the millions of closed-minded liberals. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Based on the incredible true story and best-selling book from Paramount Pictures and PureFlix comes Same Kind of Different as Me, rated PG-13, in theaters October 20th.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And we are back on Point of View, and I'm Nick Pitts. I'm joined today at Point of View at the Millennial Roundtable by a couple of Gen Xers. And so we got John Pendergrass of Dallas Baptist University, the Director of Strategic Partnerships, as well as Dr. Brent Taylor of First Baptist Church, Carrollton, Texas, and also Church at the Fields. And we have been talking about Roger Goodell and the protests that have been happening in the NFL. It stretches all the way back to 2016. Colin Kaepernick decided originally he sat down during the national anthem. And then when individuals approached him about that particular way of protesting, he transitioned and decided that he wasn't going to sit down as much as he was going to kneel down now. And when he started kneeling down, individuals, this kind of started off a wave of individuals that started kneeling during the national anthem to highlight police brutality as well as highlighting racial injustice here in the U.S. And all of this kind of came to a boiler point on Sunday when Vice President Pence went to the Indianapolis Colts game. Indianapolis Colts played the San Francisco 49ers. Pence used to be the governor of Indiana before he assumed the vice presidency. When he goes to this game, he in all likelihood knows that an individual is going to protest and kneel down. After all, the 49ers, since 2016, Colin Kaepernick took that initial kneel down, have had someone kneeling down every game since then. And so Vice President Pence was instructed and kind of came to a conclusion with President Trump that if that kneeling was to happen, that sign of disrespect in their regards was to happen, that they would then remove and move out and would leave the game immediately. Well, lo and behold, 20 individuals, all on the San Francisco 49ers team, knelt down, and in turn, Vice President Pence left the game. Much was made of his gesture towards the game, that he ended up spending upwards of $300,000 of taxpayer money for some individuals to say was just politicalization of the game. But now we come to a point now, just yesterday, that Roger Goodell, the NFL commissioner, says that next week they will be laying out guidelines. They will be putting out a more formal letter as to what is the proper protocol. And some are speculating that he might force players to be able to stand during the national anthem. And we Christians find ourselves in just kind of this mixed bag of understanding the desire. We have a God that very much desires justice to roll down like mighty waters from Amos 5, but also a desire to show respect where respect is due in Romans 13. And so we'll continue to take your phone calls. And so if you have your point of view, you can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, 800-351-1212. And we're going to go out to Texas. We've got Ronnie in Texas. Ronnie, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Hey, Ronnie, whereabouts in Texas are you?
I'm in Palestine, Texas.
Oh, okay. Home of Adrian Peterson, huh?
Yeah, home of Adrian Peterson.
Oh, very neat, very neat. So, Ronnie, tell us, what's your point of view?
My point of view, man, about the protesting that's going on, about the players kneeling, and basically Trump saying that players kneeling should be not play, and Jerry Jones saying players that kneel should not play. Well, I feel like at the end of the day, like I say, I'm a 35-year-old black male. And from my point of view, I don't feel like it's that. The problem is too much racial stuff going on in the country. And like I say, I feel like that people who claim to be Christians are out here doing stuff that's from the devil. I feel like in the world you got God and you got devil. You got the devil. You don't have black, white, Hispanic, Asian. Like, we're all, at the end of the day, we're all one color in God's eye. We're all equal. We're all one person.
Amen.
So I feel like the things that's been going on in the country far as racial stuff, like even like I say, back in slavery, people were getting hung by the same people who claim to be Christians. So I feel like if we just stop what we're doing, what's going on the news and everything, everybody stop and just say, well, we're all of God, we're all Christians, or even if you're not a Christian, whatever religion that you want to be in, that's really your business. Like I said, I'm a Christian. I believe in Jesus Christ. I believe Jesus laid down for my sins, and I just feel like everybody should come together as one in God, and that way it won't be any racial tension. That's the reason people is having racial tension in the country, because it's a black and white thing. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I feel like I say, Jesus laid down for everybody's sins. So whatever happened in the past between black and white people with slavery and lynchings and whatever it was, Rosa Parks boycotting, Martin Luther King, whatever it is, people have to learn to let that stuff go. And I'm a black male, so I can say that. You know what I'm saying? I don't agree with what happened in the past, but I can say people need to let it go. And if people let that go, and even white people, if they let however they feel about black people go, then we all come together under God, then that's when stuff will start to change. When people start praying together, that's when stuff will start to change. When people can start going to church together, and that's when things will start to change. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, Ronnie.
That's the problem with the world.
Ronnie, you bring up a great point, and I'd love to hear the pastor's comment on this. I think this represents a beautiful opportunity for the church, right? With some of the racial divisions that we find ourselves amidst right now, and really has a beautiful opportunity for the church, to be that peacekeeping force, or peacemaking force rather, to really display the manifold wisdom of God before the authorities and rulers of the day.
Well, if you grew up in church, you probably grew up singing a song that said, red and yellow, black and white, they are precious in his sight. And yet we also recognize, too, that the 11 o'clock on Sunday morning has been called the most racially divided hour in America. I think that things are changing in that regard. We are in a very tense time right now, and I think this is I'm praying and hoping that these are some of the birth pangs of healing, of people working through these issues, and like our caller said, trying to learn from the past, remember what has happened, but also look ahead to the future and find healing. Anytime someone has been hurt in their life, there has to be a time that you look at that, you examine it, you really try to open it up and try to figure out what can I learn, how can I heal, and how can I move forward. I think the problem that we have as a nation is that we're not willing to confront those issues. We're not really willing to look at the ugliness of the sin of racism and look at that even in our own hearts, and we justify why, well, I feel this way because this happened, or I saw this, or these people do that. And it's not something that can be solved en masse. Kneeling or standing for the national anthem is not going to solve the problem of racism that we have in our country. It's a sin issue that has to be dealt with at the heart, which I think is what the caller is getting to, is that ultimately we've got to have a change in our own personal hearts. I can't change you guys. I can't change any of our listeners, but I can change me, and I think that's really where it has to begin.
Yeah, it reminds me of a quote Rustin Byand would say, that to reduce the ugliness in the world, you have to reduce it in yourself first.
Yeah, I wanted to address Ronnie, too. I do believe there is a spirit of division over the country right now. It's clear, it's evident, more so than we've ever seen before. And I will say that everybody out there listening is that my friends that I'm listening to, specifically my African-American friends, they're saying this is not about the flag, that this is greater than that. Now, we did talk about honor, and I understand that, but they're saying this is more than the flag. And our nation was built on a set of values and ideals. And as messy as it is right now, I think this is all coming to a boiling point. This is a good opportunity to have these conversations. That's what's going to lead to the healing. But what I wanted to say is that we do all need to just stop for just a minute. It's gotten really loud on both sides, and I think we have, as you mentioned, Brent, that we're losing this. So what I would say then is, for the players that are out there that are kneeling, although I disagree that I think that they should stand for the national anthem, that very thing, for the ideals and values, that flag represents that. It's been messy. It's a messy process. It is part of the system, but I think that the players should stand, and I think that they should use the platform they've been given as athletes. We have NFL teams in every state in the country. There's no reason why the 50 to 90 players on each team couldn't go out to the local schools and talk about teamwork, to talk about, they look different than me. I'm white. He's black. He's African-American. He's Asian. He's Hispanic. Use their platform. Let's start talking about solutions. And I haven't heard that yet. And I think that's where the frustration is also coming from, is you can kneel, yes. Some will disagree. But when are we going to start talking about solutions?
Yeah, you bring up a really great point, in the sense that there has been an identification of the problem, and there's a multitude of problems, I think we would all agree with, that are dotting across the American landscape, but that's not new. That what Winston Churchill said, that we haven't come this far because we're made of sugar candy, that we are individuals that are resilient and that we're strong. And what Alexa de Tocqueville said in Democracy in America, what makes America great is the sense that it's not we agree on everything with one another, but we can disagree in a civil manner and move towards a more perfect union. And so when we come back, we're going to continue to talk about this NFL controversy, and we'd love to hear from you. You can call in at 800-351-1212, and we'll continue to take calls once we get back right after this.
Imagine you work where you know people do not share your faith, and they certainly don't agree with a Christian view of life and culture. You are surrounded by hostility every single day. How important would it be to have solid information to back you up? Jim in South Carolina listens to Point of View in the afternoons. He writes, I teach in a public secular university and enjoy actually being a voice for the biblical Christian worldview in a liberal setting. Thank you for your ministry. Thank you for being bold and proclaiming truth. And Jim finishes, I pray for you daily. Jim works in hostile territory, and he prays for Point of View because Point of View is a source of truth. Please help us continue being here for Jim and everyone else. We need you to visit pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151 and join the Truth Team. Enable us to be here each day by giving each month. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team.
Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View on this October 11th, 2017 day. I am joined at the Millennial Roundtable by John Pendergrass of Dallas Baptist University. He's the Director of Strategic Partnerships out there, as well as by Dr. Brent Taylor, who's the pastor, author extraordinaire, pastor at First Baptist Church, Carrollton, Texas. And we've been talking about Roger Goodell, his letter that he released yesterday to 32 NFL teams, detailing that details will be to come relative to how players should respond and the protocol necessary for the anthem. This obviously in response to the past 2 years, we've had players that have been kneeling during the national anthem in protest. And what's being seen now is it's almost as if the medium, the message is getting confused and kind of convoluted relative to the medium, which is the protesting and kneeling. Individuals are being put off by the showing of disrespect that they're not being able to hear what the actual cause is for. And we've been taking your phone calls, and we're going to continue to take those phone calls by going to Harvey in Illinois. Harvey, are you there?
Yes, sir, I'm here.
Hey, Harvey, what is your point of view?
Well, I'm calling in because as I listened to this, and the question was about Goodell's, what I want to say, his instructions on, what would be acceptable protest. And I really kind of think that thing kind of feeds into the problem. And I'll just real briefly, ever since, slavery, ever since the emancipation, it has been a steady history within America that whenever there was a protest inspired by blacks for black rights, and even included, whites along the way and different ones, that there was a limitation that the majority would tell them, that they can only go so far. And I think that that's insulting because of the fact that this protest is not a violent one. It's a peaceful one. It's based on certain agenda, and it feeds into the goals and the values that flag stands for. This whole nation was born off of what I want to say, conflict. It was born off of standing up for rights. It was born off the ability to, chart one's own freedom. And in this particular instance, we have a steady history, since Civil War for over 100 years, to where when blacks would protest, there would be some reason that protest was not right or that protest was not acceptable. So I think what Goodell does is really he kind of feeds into that stereotype. And in my opinion,
Harvey, you there? Harvey, you there? It looks like we have lost Harvey, but he brings up a really great point, Brent. We were talking about this earlier, in that this is almost to an extent that it's just a kind of reverberation from the past, right? That we were the genesis of our country originated out of a protest, that out of a sign of showing disrespect, what individuals in the UK might say, showing disrespect to the king and to his property. Wouldn't you say?
Well, that has always been the heart of protest, is that protest speaks directly to something that offends. If people were protesting things that no one cared about, then nobody pays attention to the protest. So obviously the nature of it being now the flag is a representation of previous protest about things that were important. A lot of Americans remember the Boston Tea Party. They don't have a clue as to why that mattered, but those colonists were going after a company that represented the crown and represented the policies of the crown, represented the taxes that were being levied. And so people are protesting in the Boston Tea Party at something that spoke to the heart of where the crown was at the time. So you see that throughout our history of people going to address and attack things that will get people's attention. What's happened with the flag, the protest of the flag, has really captured the attention of the nation because it is a protest towards something that we all hold dear. But no matter what happens with all the protests, and I hope that through the protest, I hope good comes out of this. I hope dialogue begins about how there can be healing, how there can be reconciliation in our country. As I said when I was on the program last, I feel like we're living in that time period between 1820 and 1860, which obviously culminated in the Civil War. I don't want to see us in a civil war, but I feel like we're moving and we have some of those same tensions that are happening. But I think that our flag, to quote our national anthem, our flag was still there. And I think that our flag is going to survive this. I think we as a nation have got to really examine our hearts and see where we are as a country.
Yeah, that's really good. Let's go back out. Let's go to Georgia, because I think Jason from Georgia might have something to add to this. Jason, are you there?
Yes. My comment, my point of view is it's all about how you're protesting. You can protest without bringing disrespect to the flag or to the national anthem, but when you protest in that way, a lot of people take that as being disrespectful, whether that was your intention or not. What they're protesting about is something that, they need to be able to stand up for. Everybody has the right to protest. Everybody has their freedom of speech. I feel like there's a right and a wrong way to do it. And by doing it this way, you're taking the attention and spotlight off of what your cause is, and it's being put on something that is, that people are they're taking it the way that you're not intending it.
Yeah, Jason, you bring up a really great point that I think is important for us if we look back into history and kind of one of the kind of seminal figures when it came to protesting that's kind of associated in our mind is Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King really did champion that peaceful protest during the 50s and 60s that really led to such great advances in the civil rights. But one of the things that Martin Luther King understood, and Jason, you pointed to, was this idea of the power of presence. That Martin Luther King knew that whenever he went into a particular city and he started protesting in that city, it brought about a significant amount of tension to that. And with that much heat, there had to be a conduit to be able to release that heat. So one of the things that King did is he would only go to places whereby there were local leaders that were in place to be at the table to bring about the necessary change. Protesting highlights issues, it doesn't necessarily solve them. What King knew to be true is that he would go to these places, but his presence would only be there and if there was individuals that were at the table to bring about the solutions, to bring about change. And I think that's one of the key components that I think is missing, John, right?
Yeah, and like I said earlier, it's where are we heading with this thing? I will say, though, for those who are protesting, and I'll come back, is you have the nation's attention whenever you have football, the national anthem about to kick off, and the game about to kick off. This is about inconvenience, and this is about disruption. And I think they're using this as an opportunity to get discussions or have discussions. And if that's where we're at, to your point, or to what you're asking me, is absolutely there needs to be solutions. So yes, you've got the United States attention. It's all we're talking about. Social media, the president, football players, everyone. But my thing is we have to have solutions now, because if this is a pivotal moment in history, are we gonna lose this opportunity, or are we going to continue to kneel?
And I think we really have to be careful not to throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak, because one of the solutions that I'm hearing right now that worries me, or that troubles me, is that people are talking, well, we'll just get rid of the national anthem at all these sporting events. We don't play a national anthem before a movie. We don't play a national anthem before church starts. We don't play a national anthem before we go out to dinner. Why do we have to play it at ball games? And I would be grieved if we lost that element, because I think there are times that it's good for us as a country to have something to rally around. Now, I also understand the protest, and I understand why that protest is happening. And much of that protest had heated up last year with Colin Kaepernick. It seemed to quiet down, and now that the president has gotten engaged, obviously it has become the talk. As John was saying, it's all over the media at this point, and it's become a big issue. We just have to go somewhere with it. Protest for protest's sake isn't going to get you anywhere. You have to have solutions that we are working toward, like you said with Dr. King. We've got to be working those directions. But at the same time, let's not abandon things that we hold dear. And I think respecting the flag, I think the national anthem, I think those are things that are worthy of our respect as a country, because otherwise we're going to end up in anarchy.
Yeah, I can't imagine. We would lose. Everybody would lose if we were to get rid of the national anthem. Like you said, it's that it's a unifying practice. It's one of those unifying rituals within the American experiment. If we were to eradicate that, but then even removing that, then you still haven't solved the racial injustice issue and the police brutality issue.
Right.
We'd love to hear from you as well. The phone lines are still lit up and they're wide open as well. So if you want to call in, you can call in at 800-351-1212, 800-351-1212, and we'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Maria Nolan and St. Anne Catholic School had a falling out. Nolan thinks her religious employer fired her from her job as principal of the school for speaking out against what she viewed as racial discrimination. The Diocese of Birmingham, Alabama, that operates St. Anne's, said that Nolan simply wasn't the right person to advance their religious mission. Nolan's responsibilities were pretty clear. As principal, she was responsible for implementing an educational atmosphere charged with the Catholic beliefs of her employer. That included monitoring lesson plans to make sure the teaching of the church was reflected in the lessons of the classroom, leading school prayers, and organizing religious activities for the students and the faculty. The court quickly determined that there was little doubt that Nolan's role as principal falls within the general ambit of the ministerial exception. Although she lacked the formal title of minister, her role clearly conveyed the church's message and carried out its mission. Therefore, the court could not interfere with what amounts to a decision by a religious body as to who best perpetuates its religious message and mission. The ministerial exception is an important doctrine that protects the unique aspects of a religious employer, giving relief to religious organizations from the rigors of employment law that may hamper their unique religious mission. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And we are back on Point of View on this October 11th, 2017 day. I'm joined at the Roundtable by Brent Taylor as well as John Pendergrass, and we're finishing up the show by continuing to take your phone calls and talk about Roger Goodell and the memo that he issued to the 32 NFL owners about the protests that continue to happen, as well as just what are some of the possible solutions. And we've been taking phone calls on everyone from that's supportive of the protests to individuals that believe it's a sign of disrespect, the individuals that don't think it's the right of Roger Goodell to be able to speak into these issues with such a strong arm. And we're going to continue to take phone calls. We've got Tony in Georgia right now. Tony, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Hey, Tony, what's your point of view?
Well, I appreciate you taking my call. Like I mentioned to your call screen, I'm an African American. I do call-ins a lot to you guys, and I listen to a lot of what's going on when it comes to the country. I agree with the NFL, because like I said, first of all, when people, especially African Americans, are sitting there, they're being misled, number one, when it comes to a lot of what's going on in the media and what have you. The people actually actually were protesting with real raw facts, like when Martin Luther King was genuine, he was at his pinnacle with what he was doing at the time, and people really understood all that, at that time. But now people are being so misled when it comes to what's really going on. Now, as an African American, I know I can speak to it because, like I say, I'm on that side and grew up among African Americans, to where I know and see a lot of things that we're being deceived with. If we got genuine hardcore facts, and if we weren't actually playing such a huge role when it comes to crime and stuff like that there, a lot of these things wouldn't be going on. I mean, you wouldn't even be talking right now if African Americans actually held themselves, if they hold themselves accountable for what comes out of themselves, be it within the neighborhood and whatever, because these millionaire football players and whatever make all this money, but they're not smart enough to make sure when it comes to PR, you actually make sure you have your stuff together before you get out there on the domestic stage with your so-called opinion. And yet you're sitting there, it almost it's like they promulgating lies, and it's all for the wrong reason. So a lot of the young folks, they get misled, and that's why you got a lot of these chaos when it comes to Black Lives Matter, hands up, don't shoot. A lot of this stuff is not even the truth. When you look at the facts of it, because like I say, even with the young kid, when Michael Brown got killed, when I sit there and you go back and look at exactly what they just spent all these millions of dollars to investigate what had actually happened, and then you got someone comes along later, writes a book saying, oh, that's not really what happened. No, we actually know what's happened. The government didn't waste all that money only to let that officer off. I mean, I'm sure that officer didn't just wake up that morning before and say, hey, you know what, I think I'm going to go out and just kill me a black man. First of all, that kid was wrong. I mean, you got Proverbs talks about how you will die young if you sit there and don't do what you're supposed to do as you grow up. Yeah. And then you got, I'm just saying.
Yeah, Tony.
That's my point of view.
Oh, Tony, thank you so much for your phone call. Tony brings up a great point, John, and that there just seems to be a loss of facts right now surrounding it. Specifically, I think what we've continued to talk about specifically is just this understanding that we just don't know what the protests are protesting anymore. And we're being lost in the message. There was 2 weeks ago, there was a group that was protesting against Donald Trump and kind of some of the comments that he made in, I believe it was South Carolina, relative to NFL players. And then we see there's protests have continued to happen to that point, but are they protesting the same thing that Colin Kaepernick was protesting back in 2016? We're not quite sure what people are protesting, and it's causing some individuals to be a little bit disconcerted with the direction.
Yeah, and I agree with the caller because it seems like there's a PR nightmare going on right now, specifically on the side of the NFL players who are taking the knee because the message hasn't been clear. And that's my opinion. And I think that I would like to touch on the fact that we need to be careful. My hope and concern is the messaging we're sending to our next generation is if we're going to protest, I am all for protests. I am for effective protest as well. But what is the solution and what do they seek? Now, if we're going to protest, are we just protesting because these injustices are taking place? Well, where we need to solution the problem from their side is that they need to tell us what do they need, what do they want, but they need to play a part of that process, and they need to speak very clearly. If you're gonna demand the attention of the country, which you have, now it's time to be clearer than ever, and that's the messaging that we need to be sending to our next generation, not just protest and taking a knee.
Yeah, so Brent, Pastor Brent, tell us from a biblical perspective, tell us for just as a pastor, what role does the church have to play in this right now? Obviously, they fall on the same day, Sundays, and so individuals are leaving church and they're trying to go watch, in my case, we're trying to watch the Tennessee Titans lose continually again and again and again. Help us to be able to understand what role does the church have to play in some of this right now?
Well, I think the church has an opportunity, and I think the church also needs to remember some things. I think the church needs to remember that the opportunity for people to speak is an important value in our nation, because when we want to silence people, we have to remember that we too will be silenced. And we're not getting into Christian bias today. I don't think we're going to have time for that, but the church has here in America, we have an incredible opportunity because we do have the opportunity to speak, to voice our opinions, to share our views, and so we should do so. We also, as the church today, has the responsibility to speak for those who cannot speak, and to also speak out against injustice, because our God stands for those important matters. And so the church has a role and a responsibility in all of that. It's such an interesting dialogue and such an interesting topic in our culture, because we have become so polarized in our nation, it's hard to find middle ground. If somebody says something in favor of the athletes, then all of a sudden they're viewed as being on one side. I hear other folks that say, well, I can't go into my job and do whatever I want. So for the owners to be able to mandate, like Jerry Jones did, you cannot do, you cannot kneel during the anthem. That makes sense. So you have people on both sides of these equations. The church has just got to look for opportunities. It's got to be attentive for opportunities to reach into the dialogue that's happening in our culture and try to stand for the things that the Lord wants us to stand for, to do justice, to love mercy, to walk humbly with our God. And I think we have to be careful as Christians. We love this country, we love this nation, but we cannot become so wrapped up in the American flag that we lose our biblical moorings, and we understand our role. Our role here, our calling here, is to be his witnesses. And that's what we've got to be about, which means we look for opportunities, even in the cultural debate, the cultural dialogue. We look for those opportunities to speak and to be representatives, to be ambassadors.
Yeah, I think you bring up a number of great points, but significantly, I think I'm always cautious if I 100% agree with someone, right? I'm reminded of what it says in Psalm 20, some trust in chariots, some trust in horses, but we trust in the name of the Lord, our God. And so I always want to be cautious whenever I agree wholeheartedly with someone, but I also want to be cautious to just become very, rather I should just say, faithful are the wounds of a friend. I want to understand that the ability to love someone also means that I'm willing to endure temporary discomfort for long-term health, and it does provide us that opportunity to do that.
And I also would say, to piggyback off you, Brent, is that the opportunity here is also reconciling this whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
And at the core of the gospel, it is a message of reconciliation, and we need to remember that.
Yeah. Could not agree more, as individuals that are agents of reconciliation. And we have come to a close of today's show. And Brent Taylor, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, this is a great discussion. I am a patriot, a fan of the flag and the national anthem, and also the right to protest.
Yeah, good.
And I appreciate the conversation.
And John, thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolutely.
I really appreciate it. And so if you would like to see more information on these individuals, you can go to our website, pointofview.net. And you can click on their picture, and then you'll be directed to their particular websites. And I am Nick Pitts, and thank you so much for joining us today. We'll be back tomorrow, and you will have me again. So look forward to having you then. See you soon.
Sometimes I joke that I'll win the lottery when God blows the winning ticket across a parking lot to me. I don't buy tickets, so if he wants me to win, that's the way. Pretty silly, right? But a lot of us take a similar stance when it comes to the ills of our culture. We don't do anything. We simply hope things will change. I encourage you to get in the game and make things change. Join Truth Team 360 and be part of a work that changes lives and communities. Visit pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151.
From Paramount Pictures and PureFlix comes Same Kind of Different as Me. Ron and Debbie Hall have everything they could ever want, except for a loving marriage. But when Debbie befriends a homeless man, their lives begin to intersect, and they are all changed forever.
Amazing how far a little tender love and care can go.
Same Kind of Different as Me, based on the true story. In theaters October 20th, rated PG-13. May be inappropriate for children under 13. More information is available at samekindofdifferentasmemovie.com.
Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.